Chapter 1, Stability by Design. Max Trent's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. every weekday. Not because it needed to, but because he liked knowing exactly when it would. The sound was gentle, some default tone he'd never bothered to change, and he reached over to silence it with the same practiced motion he'd used for the past 3 years. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, counting nothing in particular. The room was quiet in a way that felt earned. No unanswered messages. No expectations waiting to ambush him before coffee. Stability, Max believed, wasn't boring. It was mercy. He showered, dressed, and left his apartment at 7:20, coffee thermos in hand. The bus arrived at 7:24. It always did. His job was exactly what it sounded like when people asked, and he answered honestly. A standard office position. Data review, reports, small meetings that could have been emails. Paid the bills, didn't demand overtime, and let him leave work at work. Some people wanted passion from their careers. Max wanted reliability. You ever think about switching departments? His coworker Evan asked during their mid-morning break. Leaning against the counter with his mug, Max shook his head. Why would I? Evan shrugged. I don't know. Growth, ambition, all that stuff they put on motivational posters. I like knowing what my day is going to look like, Max said. Feels efficient. Evan laughed. Man, you're 26 going on 50. Max smiled, because Evan didn't mean it as an insult. Someone has to balance the universe. At lunch, Max ate alone, scrolling absently through his phone. Not messages, there weren't any, but news headlines and event listings. That was when he saw it. Marsha Adams' one-night-only charity benefit concert. He stopped scrolling. The photo was recent. She looked older, more confident. Her hair styled differently than he remembered, but it was unmistakably her. The woman who had once fallen into his lap in a bookstore now stared out from his phone screen like she belonged there. His chest tightened, not painfully, just enough to remind him that some things never fully healed because they were never wounds to begin with. 3 years earlier, no, longer than that now, Max had been a senior in college, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a bookstore because all the tables were taken. He had notes spread out around him, a half-empty coffee at his side, and a paper due Monday that he was aggressively avoiding by rereading the same paragraph. That was when the world became a blur of red and chaos. There was the sound of a cup tipping, coffee splashing, and then suddenly a woman was sitting in his lap, frozen in horror. Oh my God, she said, eyes wide. I am so sorry. I swear there was something on the floor. She pointed behind her at nothing. Absolutely nothing. Max blinked once, then twice. He said intelligently. I don't usually do this, she rushed on. I mean, I trip, but not into strangers. I'm not reckless, You can stay there, Max said, then immediately regretted it. I mean, no, I didn't mean sorry. I'm not upset. You're not bleeding, right? She stared at him, then laughed. Actually laughed. It was bright and surprised and completely disarming. No, she said. Just my dignity. He helped her off his lap and into the seat next to him, handing her napkins for the coffee spill. They talked. About music. About books. About how she hated mornings and he secretly loved routines. She told him she was a piano performance major. He told her he had no musical talent whatsoever. You don't need talent to appreciate it, she'd said. You just need to listen. Her name was Marsha Adams. Within an hour, Max knew 2 things. She was destined for something extraordinary, and he was already in trouble. By the time Max finished work that day in the present, the concert listing was still open on his phone. At home, he reheated leftovers and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the screen like it might change its mind. He hadn't seen her since graduation. Hadn't spoken to her since the day she left. They'd never fought, never accused. When she'd gotten the offer, an orchestra position that would launch her career, he'd hugged her and told her the truth. I can't be the reason you don't take this, he'd said, voice steady even as his heart broke. You'll resent me, and I couldn't live with that. She'd cried. He'd held her. She'd understood because she always did. After that, he watched from afar. Articles, videos, applause she couldn't hear from him but that he gave anyway. His parents worried. His mother had said it outright once over dinner. You can't keep loving her forever. Max had smiled, calm as ever. The heart wants what it wants, he'd said, even if reality doesn't agree. Now reality had put her name back in his hands. He bought a ticket before he could talk himself out of it. As the confirmation email arrived, Max leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Stability was still what he needed. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let the past play one more note. Chapter 2, The Past That Never Left. Sunday dinners at Max Trent's parents' house had followed the same structure for as long as he could remember. His mother cooked too much food, his father pretended not to notice and ate seconds anyway, and Max listened more than he spoke. It was comfortable in the way routines usually were, predictable, gentle, and built from habit rather than effort. Work still treating you well? His father asked, carving the roast with surgical focus. It is, Max said. Same as always. His mother glanced at him over the rim of her wineglass. That's not a bad thing, you know? Stability matters. Max smiled. You're the one who taught me that. She hesitated, then set her glass down. Yes, well, stability doesn't have to mean standing still. There it was. Max didn't stiffen, didn't sigh. He'd learned a long time ago that defensiveness only prolonged conversations like this. Mom, I'm not criticizing, she said quickly. I just worry. You work, you come home, you read, you sleep. You don't date. You don't even complain about not dating. That worries me more. His father cleared his throat. Your mother just wants to know you're happy. Max considered that. Happiness, to him, wasn't fireworks. It wasn't chaos or reinvention or late-night confessions with strangers. Happiness was knowing who you were when you woke up and still liking that person by the time you went to bed. I am happy, he said gently. I'm just careful. His mother studied him, her expression softening. Careful because of her? Max didn't pretend not to understand. There was only ever one her. Yes, he said, because of her. She was a long time ago, his father said, not unkindly. College feels like another lifetime. Max nodded. For some things. His mother sighed. You can't keep loving her forever. He met her gaze, calm and steady. The heart wants what it wants, he said, even if reality doesn't agree. Silence settled over the table, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. His parents exchanged a look that said, we don't understand this, but we love him anyway. After dinner, Max hugged them both, promised to call during the week, and drove home with the windows cracked open, letting the cool air clear his head. He didn't tell them about the concert. Back in his apartment, Max sat on the edge of his bed with his phone in his hands, the confirmation email still open. Charity benefit concert, Marsha Adams. The date glowed on the screen like a countdown he hadn't agreed to but was oddly grateful for. He hadn't told himself he was going for closure. That felt dishonest. He was going because she mattered, because she always had. Max lay back and stared at the ceiling, the same one he'd stared at that morning, though it felt different now. Less quiet, not louder, just expectant. 3 years ago, when Marsha had called him into the practice hall, Max had known something was wrong before she even spoke. She'd been sitting at the piano, hands folded in her lap, posture too still. Marsha was never still unless she was bracing for something. I got an offer, she said. Max smiled instantly. That's amazing. She swallowed. It's with the regional orchestra. Full contract. Her voice wavered. It's everything I worked for. He crossed the room in 2 strides and hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I'm so proud of you. She clung to him, fingers twisting in the back of his shirt. It's out of state. I know. I don't want to lose you. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. She was crying, openly, without trying to hide it. Marsha never hid from her emotions. It was one of the things he loved most about her. You won't lose me, he said, though even then he'd known that wasn't entirely true. Max, I can't be the reason you don't take this, he said quietly. You'll regret it, and I'd hate myself for that. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. I don't care about regret. I care about you. And that's why you have to go, he said, voice steady even as something inside him fractured. You were meant for this. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. They cried, and they held each other, and they pretended that love alone could soften the edges of reality. On the day she left, Max stood in the parking lot and watched her load the last of her things into her car. You're going to be incredible, he said. She kissed him like she was trying to memorize him. You already are. Then she drove away, and Max stayed where he was long after the car disappeared, learning for the first time what it felt like to let go without stopping loving. The week before the concert passed more slowly than Max would have liked. Work blurred together. Evan noticed. You're distracted, he said, peering at Max over his monitor. You okay? Yeah, Max said automatically, then paused. Actually, yeah, just have something coming up. Evan grinned. Something or someone? Max huffed a quiet laugh. Something like that. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. This wasn't nervous excitement. It was reverence. The night before the concert, Max laid his clothes out with more care than usual. Nothing flashy. Nothing new. Just clean lines and neutral colors. He wasn't trying to impress her. He never had. He just wanted to show up as himself. As he turned off the light and climbed into bed, his phone buzzed. A notification from a music site he followed. An interview clip featuring Marsha Adams. He almost didn't open it. Almost. Her voice filled the room, warm and confident. Music is about connection, she was saying. It's about the people who see you before the applause and after the lights go down. Max closed his eyes, heart steady, aching, full. Tomorrow he would see her again. Not as a memory, not as a shadow, but as the woman she'd become, and the one he'd never stopped loving. Chapter 3, the woman on the poster. Marsha Adams had played in concert halls on 3 continents, but the quiet of a hotel room before a performance still made her restless. She stood barefoot by the window, city lights stretching out below like scattered notes on a staff. This city, his city, felt familiar in a way that bypassed logic. She'd flown in that morning, her name printed on banners outside the venue, her schedule packed down to the minute. Interviews, rehearsal, sound check. smiles she knew how to wear without thinking. Still, her hands shook slightly as she flexed her fingers. "You're nervous," her manager, Lila, said from the armchair, flipping through a tablet. "That's new." Marsha smiled faintly. "It's not new. It's just specific." Lila raised an eyebrow. "You want to elaborate? Or should I assume it's artistic temperament and let it go?" Marsha hesitated, then shook her head. Let it go. Some truths didn't fit neatly into conversation. Some had names. She hadn't expected to be invited to perform here. The charity had reached out months ago, and she'd accepted without thinking too hard about the location. Cities blurred together when you were always moving. It was only when she'd seen the address, the venue, the neighborhood, that the past had surfaced like a held breath finally released. Max. She hadn't said his name out loud in years, but it lived in her the way certain melodies did. Never gone. Just waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Marsha sat at the piano later that afternoon during rehearsal, fingers gliding over the keys with practiced ease. Music had always been the place where her emotions made sense, where longing became harmony instead of ache. "Everything okay?" the conductor asked gently. "Yes," she said automatically, then paused. "Actually, can we run the last piece again?" He nodded, lifting his baton. She played flawlessly. That was the problem. Years ago, she had sat at another piano, in a practice hall that smelled faintly of dust and old wood, her hands useless in her lap. "I don't want to lose you," she'd said, voice breaking. Max had looked at her like he always did when she was overwhelmed. Steady, present, anchoring. Like he could hold the world still if she needed him to. "You won't," he'd said. But she had. Not because she left. Because she hadn't known how to come back. The truth was uglier than the version she told herself when nights were long and hotel rooms felt too empty. She hadn't reached out because she was afraid. Afraid that if she heard his voice, she'd choose him over everything she'd worked for. Afraid that if she asked him to wait, he would, and she'd destroy the very thing she loved most about him. His selflessness. So she stayed silent. And silence, she'd learned, could be its own kind of cruelty. Back in the present, Marsha stood backstage as the audience filed in. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, heart steadying into something closer to resolve. She wasn't here for the past. She was here to play, to give something beautiful to people who needed it. Still, as she stepped out under the lights and took her seat at the grand piano, her eyes scanned the room before she could stop herself. And then there, Max wasn't hiding. He sat at a table near the center, posture relaxed, hands folded loosely in front of him. He looked older, not dramatically, just more himself. The boyish edges had softened into something quietly sure. When their eyes met, the world tilted. Marsha's breath caught, sharp and sudden. Her heart didn't race so much as lurch, like it had been moving in the wrong direction and had finally been corrected. He smiled, not tentative, not resentful, real. "Oh," she thought distantly, "there you are." She finished the piece on muscle memory alone, applause washing over her like static. When she stood and bowed, she could feel him watching, not like an audience member, but like someone who already knew her. Backstage, she barely registered the compliments, the quick hugs, the stagehand asking if she needed water. Her mind was already pulling her toward him. "I need a minute," she said, already moving. Lila started to protest, then caught one look at her face and stopped. "Don't disappear." "I won't," Marsha said. "I promise." Up close, Max was exactly the same and completely different. "Hi," she said, suddenly aware that words felt insufficient. "Hi," he replied. They laughed at the same time, a little breathless. "You look," he began, then stopped, smiling. "You look like you." She exhaled. "You have no idea how much I love that." There was 1,000 things she wanted to say. "I missed you. I'm sorry. I never stopped." Instead, she settled for the safest truth. "I'm really glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it," he said simply. Her chest tightened. Of course he wouldn't. From the outside, it probably looked like a pleasant reunion. Old friends catching up. Polite warmth. But Marsha could feel the tension humming between them. Electric and alive. "I have to go back soon," she said reluctantly. "But don't vanish." He raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't planning on it." "Promise." "I promise." Impulse one. She leaned in, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "I missed you." Then she was gone before she could lose her nerve. Back at the piano, Marsha took a breath and spoke into the microphone. "This last piece," she said, voice steady despite everything, "is about gratitude, about loving someone enough to let them go, and realizing that love doesn't always end where distance begins." She glanced out at the audience. Her eyes found him immediately. She played the opening notes, then began to sing. "I will always love you." The room faded. There was only Max, only the quiet man who had loved her enough to step aside, only the truth she'd carried through every city, every standing ovation. As she sang, Marsha knew, absolutely undeniably, that her heart had never moved on. And this time, she wasn't going to pretend it had. Chapter 4. When the applause ends, the last note lingered in the air longer than it had any right to. Marsha's fingers lifted from the keys, her voice falling silent as the final chord resolved into stillness. For half a heartbeat, the room seemed unsure of itself, like no one quite knew whether breathing would break something sacred. Then the applause came. It wasn't polite. It wasn't restrained. It rose up in a wave that pressed against the stage, against her chest, against the moment she was still trying to hold on to. People stood. Chairs scraped. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted her name. Marsha stood automatically, bowing, smiling, letting her training carry her through the motions. But her eyes searched the room even as she did, drawn by a gravity she no longer tried to deny. Max was still there. He hadn't stood right away. He was clapping, slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable except for the quiet intensity in his eyes. When he finally rose with the rest of the audience, it felt like a punctuation mark rather than a reaction. You heard me, she thought. You understood. That was all she needed. Backstage buzzed with movement the moment she stepped off stage. Congratulations overlapped. Hands touched her shoulders. Someone pressed a glass of water into her palm. You were phenomenal, the conductor said, genuine awe in his voice. Thank you, she replied, meaning it, but her attention was already slipping past him, toward the exit, toward the lobby where Max would be waiting or leaving. She didn't let herself think about which terrified her more. 5 minutes, Lila said firmly, appearing at her side like she always did when Marsha looked ready to vanish. Then you have donors to greet. Marsha nodded. 5 minutes. She didn't waste them. Max hadn't planned what he would do after the concert. He'd assumed, wrongly it turned out, that he would simply leave, that seeing her, hearing her would be enough. But when the lights came up and people began moving around him, he stayed seated, hands resting on the table, heart doing something strange and unfamiliar. Not aching, not breaking, opening. You look like someone just rewired your nervous system, a woman at the neighboring table said with a grin. Max blinked. Sorry, she laughed. Relax. I mean it in a good way. That song, wow. He nodded, unable to explain that it hadn't felt like a performance to him. It had felt like a conversation he'd waited years to hear. When he finally stood, he wasn't sure where to go. He didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to disappear. He settled for waiting. Marsha found him near the edge of the lobby, exactly where she'd hoped he would be. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the crowd faded into background static as they stood there, suspended between who they had been and who they might become. That was, Max began, then stopped, exhaling softly. That was incredible. She smiled, smaller this time, more vulnerable. Thank you. I mean it, he said. You always had that ability to make it feel personal. Her throat tightened. It was. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. They didn't hug. Not yet. The space between them felt important, like a bridge neither wanted to rush across. Do you have time? She asked. After everything? He nodded without hesitation. I do. Relief flickered across her face, quick and unguarded. Good, she said, because I really don't want this to be another almost. They found a quiet corner once the initial wave of congratulations passed. Someone brought them drinks neither remembered ordering. They talked like people easing into cold water, careful at first, testing boundaries, laughing more easily than expected. So, Marsha said, tilting her head. Office job. Max chuckled. Still thrilling. Still stable. She smiled warmly. You always liked knowing where things stood. I still do. And you? He asked. World-famous pianist. Living out of suitcases. Less glamorous than it sounds, she admitted. Hotel rooms blur together. You start measuring time in airports. He studied her for a moment. Are you happy? The question landed softly, but it mattered. Marsha didn't answer right away. I love what I do, she said carefully. But happiness, I think that's more complicated. He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. I'm glad you came, she said again, quieter this time. So am I, Max replied. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear you play again. She hesitated, then took a breath. Max, the song. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You didn't have to explain. I want to, she said. I chose it because it was honest. Because there's a difference between leaving and letting go. He held her gaze. I never let go. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. Marsha had learned how to hold herself together on stages much larger than this. I know, she said softly. I think I was afraid that if I reached out, you'd still be waiting. And that would have been worse than silence. He frowned. Why? Because you deserved a life that wasn't paused on my account. Max considered that, then shook his head. You never paused my life. You just shaped it. That surprised her into a small laugh. You make it sound noble. It wasn't, he said honestly. It was just love. The word hung between them, unembellished and real. Eventually, Lila appeared again, polite but pointed. We're almost done here. Marsha nodded. I'll be right there. She turned back to Max, reluctance written plainly on her face. I leave in 3 days, she said. He absorbed that, then nodded. I'm not going anywhere. Her smile returned, brighter this time. Neither am I. She leaned in, this time not stopping at his cheek. Her forehead rested briefly against his, a gesture so intimate it stole his breath. This isn't the past, she whispered. We don't have to lose each other again. Max closed his eyes for a second, letting the truth of that settle. Then let's not. When she pulled away, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't final. It was a beginning. As Max walked out into the night, the city felt different. Not louder, not faster, just open. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something he was protecting himself from. It felt like something he might finally step toward. Chapter 5, the space between notes, the morning after the concert, Max woke up before his alarm. That alone felt like a small betrayal of his carefully managed life. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in fragments that refused to settle into a single sensible memory. The song, her voice, the way she'd rested her forehead against his like it was the most natural thing in the world. This isn't the past, she'd said. Max sat up and ran a hand through his hair. He wasn't afraid of the past. He'd lived with it long enough to know its shape, its limits. What unsettled him was the present. How quickly it had expanded to make room for possibility. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text. Marsha. Good morning. I hope you slept better than I did. He stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before answering. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it right. Max, I slept fine, but I woke up thinking I dreamed the whole thing. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Marsha, I was worried about that. For the record, it was very real. Marsha, also, I owe you coffee. Possibly several. Max smiled despite himself. Max, I accept payment plans. They met later that morning at a small cafe halfway between his apartment and her hotel. Max arrived early out of habit. Marsha arrived exactly on time, slightly breathless, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. Hi, she said, smiling like she'd already seen him that day. Hi, he replied, standing automatically. They hovered for a half second, then settled into an easy, familiar hug that felt like coming home to a place neither had realized they'd memorized. Still stable? She asked as they sat down. Dangerously so, he said. You? Still living out of suitcases, she replied. But this one has good coffee, so I'm counting it as a win. They ordered, then sat there, cups warming their hands, surrounded by the low hum of other people's conversations. For a moment, neither spoke. I keep thinking, Marsha said finally, that we're going to run out of things to say because we missed so much time. Max shook his head. I don't think that's possible. She studied him. Why not? Because we didn't stop being ourselves, he said. We just weren't in the same place. That seemed to settle something in her. She nodded slowly. I like that. They talked about small things first. Her travel schedule, his office job, the way his coworker Evan kept trying to convince him that ambition required suffering. You were always stubborn about your routines, she said, amused. And you were always convinced sleep was optional, he countered. She laughed. I stand by that. Sleep is a suggestion. There it was, that ease, the rhythm that had never really gone away. Later they walked. No destination, just movement. The city unfolded around them in familiar streets and quiet corners. Marsha slowed near a bookstore and stopped short. Do you remember this place? She asked. Max did. Of course he did. I do, he said. She winced slightly. I've apologized for that, right? The falling? Only about 100 times. Good. Because I'm still embarrassed. He smiled. I wasn't. They stood there for a moment, the memory hovering between them. Not painful, not heavy. Just real. Can I ask you something? Marsha said. Anything. Why didn't you ever hate me? Max blinked. Why would I? For leaving, she said. For not calling. For disappearing. He considered the question carefully, the way he always did when something mattered. Because you didn't leave me, he said. You left for yourself. Those aren't the same thing. Her eyes filled. Not enough to spill over, just enough to shine. You always did that, she murmured. Did what? Made things feel survivable. He shrugged lightly. I had practice. They ended up at his apartment by mutual, unspoken agreement. It wasn't dramatic. It just made sense. This is very you, Marsha said, taking in the space. Clean. Quiet. I'll pretend that was a compliment. It absolutely was. She wandered to the bookshelf, fingers tracing spines. You kept the music theory book. Max winced. That thing is indestructible. She laughed, then sobered. You really didn't date? He met her gaze, honest. I didn't want to give half of myself to someone who deserved all of it. Marsha swallowed. And you thought all of it still belonged to me. It did, he said simply. It still does. Just differently now. Less like longing. More like recognition. That surprised her into a soft smile. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm full of understated charm. She rolled her eyes. You always were. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, close enough to feel each other's presence without touching. The space felt intentional, respectful. I was scared, Marsha admitted. After I left, every time I thought about calling you, I imagined you answering, still exactly where I'd left you. And I couldn't do that to you. Max frowned. You didn't trap me in place. I know that now, she said. But back then, I didn't trust myself not to ask you to follow me. And I was afraid you would. He considered that, then nodded. You're probably right. She laughed softly. See? Still honest. Always. That evening, they ordered takeout and ate on the floor like they were 20 again. It wasn't nostalgic. It was comfortable. You know, Marsha said, chopsticks hovering. Most people I date are intense. Max raised an eyebrow. That sounds exhausting. It is, she said. They want to be part of the music, to matter in that way. And you didn't? I just wanted to listen, he said. To support. To show up. Her gaze softened. That's why I was better when you were around. He set his food down. You were always good. Yes, she said. But I was steadier with you. The words settled between them, warm and dangerous. I leave in 2 days, she said quietly. Max nodded. I know. I don't want this to be a beautiful interruption, she said. I don't want to sing about you forever and never speak to you again. He met her eyes. Then don't. She smiled, tentative but hopeful. That was easy. It doesn't have to be hard to be real, he replied. She leaned over and kissed him. Not rushed, not desperate, just certain. When they pulled back, Marsha rested her forehead against his, laughing softly. We're really doing this, aren't we? Max smiled, heart steady, open. Yeah, I think we are. Later, after she left for her hotel, Max stood alone in his apartment, the quiet different now. Not empty, anticipatory. For the first time in years, stability didn't feel like something he was clinging to. It felt like something he could build on. Chapter 6, Old Roads, New Choices. The second morning they woke up together, separately but aware of each other. Felt different. Max noticed it immediately. The first morning had been tentative, buoyed by adrenaline and rediscovery. This one carried weight. Not dread exactly, but awareness. The kind that came when something mattered enough to demand honesty. Marsha texted him just after 8. Marsha, I have rehearsal until noon. Want to grab lunch after? Max, I'd like that. He stared at the message after sending it, noting the simplicity of his response. No qualifiers. No hedging. That was new. At work, Evan leaned over the partition. You're smiling again. I always smile, Max said mildly. Yeah, but now it looks like it might be contagious, Evan replied. What changed? Max considered lying, then decided not to. Someone important came back into my life. Evan grinned. About time. Marsha arrived at lunch flushed and energized, her hair pulled back hastily, a smudge of pencil still on the side of her hand. You look like you just argued with a piano and won, Max said. She laughed. It was a draw. We'll rematch tomorrow. They ordered, settled into a booth by the window. For a while, they talked about rehearsal, about the charity, about nothing that mattered and everything that did. Then Marsha's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting subtle, but Max caught it. What is it? He asked. She hesitated. It's an email. He waited. I got an offer, she said finally. The words landed like a familiar chord. Max didn't react right away. He didn't smile or stiffen. He simply nodded once. Tell me. She exhaled slowly. A residency. 6 months. Vienna. There it was. The ghost of a conversation they'd already had once. It's an incredible opportunity, she said quickly, then stopped herself. Not but. Just yes. It is. Max folded his hands on the table. His voice when he spoke was calm. Are you excited? Yes, she admitted. And terrified. And angry that it came now. He absorbed that. Why now is bad? Because I don't want to lose you again, she said, meeting his eyes squarely. And because I don't want you to give me up out of habit. That startled him. I never gave you up because it was easy, he said. I know, she replied. That's what scares me. They sat in silence for a moment, the clink of dishes and murmur of the cafe filling the space. This feels like the same fork in the road, Max said quietly. It isn't, Marsha said immediately. Not unless we make it one. He studied her, really looked at her. Not the woman on the poster. Not the girl in the bookstore. The person in front of him now, older, braver, no longer running from her own wants. What do you want? He asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady. I want you. I want my career. And I don't want to pretend those things can't exist at the same time. Max leaned back slightly, considering. That's different from before, he said. Yes, she agreed. Before, I thought love meant choosing. Now I think it means building. He smiled faintly. You've been rehearsing that speech. She rolled her eyes. For years. That afternoon, Max took a walk instead of going straight home. He let himself think, really think, about what scared him. It wasn't distance. He could handle distance. He'd proven that. It was the fear of becoming the quiet sacrifice again. of loving in a way that required him to disappear. That night, they cooked together in his apartment. Marsha chopped vegetables with unnecessary intensity. "You're overthinking," she said without looking up. "I'm processing," he corrected. Same thing with better PR. They ate at the table this time. Candles lit not for romance, but because Marsha claimed overhead lighting was emotionally hostile. "Max," she said finally, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it." He nodded. "I'm listening." "If I go," she said, "it's not because I'm choosing music over you. It's because music is part of who I am. Just like stability is part of who you are." He considered that. "And where does that leave us?" "With options," she said. "Real ones. Visits. Calls. Plans that include both of us. Not silence. Not assumptions." He looked at her across the table, heart steady but full. "You don't need me to step aside anymore," he said. "No," she said softly. "I need you to stand with me." That was the difference. The next day, Max met his parents for coffee. His mother noticed immediately. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," he admitted. She smiled. "That's good. There's something you should know," he said. "Marsha's back. Temporarily." His mother's expression softened. And she might leave again," Max said. "But this time, I'm not stepping away preemptively." His father nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like growth." Max smiled. "Feels like it." That evening, Marsha packed in his living room, her suitcase open, clothes spread everywhere. "You pack like chaos is a lifestyle choice," Max observed. "It is," she replied cheerfully. She paused, then looked up at him. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "I am. I don't know exactly what comes next, but I know I don't want fear making the decisions for me anymore." She crossed the room and hugged him tightly. "I wish I'd known that version of you before." He smiled into her hair. "I think you helped make him." They stood there, not rushing, not pretending certainty was required. This time, the road ahead wasn't about letting go. It was about walking forward, together, even if not always side by side. Chapter 7, Choosing Without Vanishing. The night before Marsha left, the city was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Max noticed it as they walked. No destination. No plan. Just moving side by side through streets he'd known for years. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain that hadn't quite committed. Streetlights cast long shadows that stretched and overlapped, never fully separating. "This feels familiar," Marsha said, hands tucked into her coat sleeves. "Us walking like this." "It does," Max agreed. "But it doesn't feel like déjà vu." She smiled. "No, it feels upgraded." He chuckled. "Version 2.0? At least," she said. "With fewer misunderstandings. Hopefully." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Marsha glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm thinking," he replied. "About tomorrow." She nodded. "Me too." The light changed, but neither moved right away. "Say it," she said gently. "Whatever you're holding back." Max exhaled slowly. "I'm not afraid of you going," he said. "I'm afraid of disappearing again. Of becoming the person you love quietly, from a distance, while your life happens somewhere else." Marsha reached for his hand without hesitation, her grip firm. "That's not happening." "I need to hear why," he said, not accusing, just honest. She stopped walking entirely, turning to face him. Cars passed. The city kept going. "Because I'm not asking you to wait for me," she said. "I'm asking you to be with me. Actively. Imperfectly. Even when it's inconvenient." He searched her face for uncertainty and found none. "And Vienna?" he asked. "Is 6 months," she said. "Not forever. And it's not a wall, it's a stretch. One we can plan around." Max nodded slowly. "I've always been good at plans." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I trust you." The words settled deep, anchoring something that had felt loose for years. Later, back at his apartment, they sat on the couch, knees touching, the room lit only by a single lamp. Marsha's suitcase stood by the door, zipped and ready. "I hate that thing," Max said, nodding toward it. She followed his gaze. "Me too. But it's temporary. So are goodbyes," he said, surprising himself. She smiled at that. "You've changed." "I think I stopped assuming loss was inevitable," he replied. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I wish you could hear yourself the way I do." "How do you hear me?" "As someone who finally knows he's allowed to take up space in someone else's life." He swallowed. "I didn't think I was." "I know," she said. "That's on me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. "Max," she said eventually, "if you told me tomorrow that this was too much, that you needed to step back, I'd understand." He turned to her. "I don't want to step back." She met his gaze, vulnerable now. "I don't want to drag you into something that costs you peace." He smiled gently. "You're not. You're inviting me into something that adds to it." Her breath caught, just slightly. The next morning came too soon. They stood outside her hotel, the sun barely up, the city yawning awake around them. This goodbye felt different from the last one. No desperation, no finality. Just wait. I'll call you tonight, she said. Once I land. I'll be awake, he replied. She laughed softly. Of course you will. She hesitated, then wrapped her arms around him, holding on longer than politeness required. This time, she said quietly, don't watch me leave like you're losing something. He rested his chin against her hair. This time, I'm watching you go knowing you're coming back. She pulled away just enough to look at him, eyes bright. You're sure? Yes, he said, because we chose this together. She kissed him then. Not a lingering farewell, not a promise weighed down by fear. Just a kiss that said this continues. When she walked toward the car, Max didn't stay behind. He walked with her to the door, helped load the suitcase, closed it gently. Go, he said. Do what you love. She smiled. I will. And I'll come back to you. As the car pulled away, Max stood there for a moment, heart steady. He wasn't alone. He wasn't waiting. He was building something quietly, intentionally, without vanishing. Chapter 8, The Quiet Constant. Distance did not arrive all at once. It crept in on time zones and calendars, on carefully planned calls and the small silences that slipped between them when schedules didn't quite line up. It announced itself in photos Marsha sent from Vienna. Cobblestone streets dusted with snow, rehearsal halls with impossible acoustics, cafes she claimed were criminally charming. It settled into Max's apartment in the form of a second toothbrush that stayed right where it was. What surprised Max most was how little it hurt. He missed her, yes, deeply, but the missing no longer felt like loss. It felt like connection stretched thin but unbroken, like a wire pulled taut between 2 points that trusted each other not to let go. They talked every day. Sometimes it was long, meandering conversations that wandered from music to office gossip to childhood memories neither had ever bothered to share before. Sometimes it was 5 minutes between rehearsals and meetings, her voice breathless, his calm and grounding. You'd love this hall, she said once, angling her phone so he could see the soaring ceiling behind her. The sound just stays. I'd love anything you love, he replied without thinking. She went quiet for a second. You always do that. Do what? Say things that feel permanent without making them heavy. Max smiled. I like permanence. I just don't see the point in dramatizing it. On a rainy Thursday evening, Max sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, spreadsheets glowing softly on the screen. Evan had invited him out for drinks again and Max had declined again. Instead, he was building something. Plan. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was a shared document titled Vienna/Home with bullet points and notes and dates penciled in gently, like they could be erased if needed. Visits. Work from anywhere options. Budget lines. Leave days. He wasn't rearranging his life for Marsha. He was making room. His phone rang. Hey, Marsha said. You're not busy, are you? Just reorganizing the universe, he said mildly. What's up? She laughed. I got your document. He winced. Already? Yes, she said. And I cried. That wasn't the goal. It kind of was, she countered. You didn't assume anything. You didn't promise things you couldn't control. You just built space for me. He closed the laptop. You're part of my life. Space is implied. She exhaled softly. I've dated men who wrote poetry about loving me. None of them ever did this. I'm bad at poetry, he said. I'm good at logistics. You're good at love, she corrected. Quiet, consistent love. He felt that settle somewhere deep and steady. When Marsha came home for her first visit, Max met her at the airport. Not standing back this time, not waiting to see if she'd drift away. He was right there. She spotted him immediately and broke into a smile so bright it made strangers glance over. When she reached him, she dropped her bag and wrapped herself around him without hesitation. You came, she said, breathless, like there'd ever been doubt. Of course I did, he replied into her hair. The reunion wasn't frantic. It didn't feel like reclaiming something lost. It felt like continuity. At his apartment, she kicked off her shoes and sighed contentedly. Still emotionally stable lighting? Always, he said. They cooked together, fell into the easy choreography they'd always had, him methodical, her intuitive. At dinner, Marsha watched him thoughtfully. You know, she said, I used to think love had to feel overwhelming to be real. Max took a sip of water. And now I think overwhelming is what happens when something isn't secure, she said. This, she gestured between them, this feels like standing on solid ground. He smiled. That's my specialty. Later, curled together on the couch, Marsha traced absent patterns on his arm. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Regret what? Letting me go, she said. Back then. Max considered the question honestly. I regret that it hurt, he said. I don't regret trusting you to become who you needed to be. She swallowed. I spent years thinking I had to earn the right to come back to you. He turned to face her. You never lost it. Her eyes shone, but she smiled. I'm still getting used to how gentle you are with me. I'm not gentle, he said. I'm intentional. She laughed softly. Even better. The months passed like that, measured, thoughtful, full without being frantic. Max visited Vienna once, standing in the back of a rehearsal hall as Marsha played. Her focus absolute, her joy unmistakable. She found him afterward and pulled him into a quiet corner. "Did I do okay?" she asked, suddenly the same woman who'd once fallen into his lap in a bookstore. "You always do," he said. "But you were especially brilliant tonight." She leaned into him, smiling. "I play better when you're near." Back home, Max's parents noticed the difference. "You look settled," his mother said one evening. "I am," he replied. "With her." "With myself," he said. "She just fits." On the last night of her residency, Marsha stood on stage and looked out at the audience, her heart calm. Max was there. Of course he was. She didn't sing this time. She didn't need to. The music spoke for itself, full, confident, unafraid. When the applause came, she bowed, smiling not just at the crowd, but at the life she'd built, and the man who'd shown her that love didn't require sacrifice to survive. Afterward, as they walked out into the night together, Marsha slipped her hand into Max's. "I'm not leaving again," she said. He squeezed her fingers gently. "I know. What if someday my career changes?" she asked. "What if it slows down?" "Then we adjust," he said. "Stability isn't rigidity. It's knowing you'll still be there when things shift." She smiled, eyes soft. "You're my constant, Max Trent." He looked at her, heart full, steady, finally unguarded. "And you," he said, "are the best variable I ever allowed into my life." Chapter 9, Chosen Days. The first morning they woke up together for good, nothing remarkable happened. No dramatic sunrise. No orchestral swell of realization. Just light filtering through the curtains of Max's apartment, the familiar hum of the city outside, and Marsha turning onto her side with a quiet sigh that sounded like relief. Max lay awake, as he often did before his alarm, staring at the ceiling he'd stared at for years. The difference was subtle but undeniable. The room no longer felt like a container for his routines. It felt shared even before she opened her eyes. She did a moment later. "Hi," she said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning," he replied. She studied him for a second, brow furrowing slightly. "You're thinking too loudly." He smiled. "I always do." "About what?" He considered that. "About how this feels very normal." Her lips curved upward. "That's your way of saying you're happy, isn't it?" "Yes," he said. "Very." She shifted closer, resting her head against his chest. "Good, because I was worried it might feel strange. Or overwhelming." "It's neither," he said. "It feels chosen." That word lingered. They stayed there a while longer, not rushing. Eventually, Marsha sat up and glanced at the clock. "I should get up," she said reluctantly. "Jet lag is pretending not to exist, but it will win." Max nodded. "Coffee helps." "Always," she agreed. "You still drink it like a responsible adult?" "I do," he said. "Black. Predictable." She laughed as she slid out of bed. "I missed this. You being exactly who you are." Life didn't rearrange itself dramatically once Marsha moved back. That surprised both of them. She didn't quit performing. She didn't suddenly slow down into something unrecognizable. Instead, she chose differently. Fewer tours strung back to back. More intentional scheduling. Concerts that excited her rather than exhausted her. Max didn't change jobs either. He didn't need to. Stability was still his foundation. But now it wasn't something he protected from the world. It was something he offered to someone else. They learned each other again in small, practical ways. Marsha discovered that Max organized his pantry by frequency of use, not alphabetically. Max learned that Marsha hummed when she was anxious and went silent when she was truly overwhelmed. He learned to listen for that silence. "You don't have to fix it," she told him once, curled up beside him after a long rehearsal day. "Sometimes I just need you to be here." "I can do that," he said. "I'm excellent at being here." She smiled into his shoulder. "I know." They told his parents over dinner. His mother watched Marsha carefully at first, the way mothers did when they were trying not to project years of worry onto a single person. But Marsha met her with honesty. "I know I hurt him," she said quietly, not defensive, not self-flagellating, not intentionally. "But I know it mattered." Max's father nodded. "What matters now is what you do next." Marsha reached for Max's hand without looking at him. "I stay," she said simply. "And when I leave, I come back." His mother exhaled slowly, something easing in her expression. "That's all we ever wanted for him." Max squeezed Marsha's fingers. "Me too." The comedy of their life together came from contrast. Marsha forgot where she left her phone at least twice a day. Max knew where everything was, always. Marsha made impulsive plans that involved flights and borrowed instruments. Max made spreadsheets that somehow accommodated them without complaint. "You're not secretly resenting this, are you?" she asked him one night, half joking. He looked genuinely startled. "Why would I?" "Because I'm a lot." He considered that, then nodded. "You are." She swatted his arm. "Hey, but you're not chaos," he continued calmly. "You're motion. There's a difference." She stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. You see me better than anyone I've ever known. That's because I've always been looking, he said. Months passed. Seasons shifted. One evening, Max came home to find Marsha at the piano they'd squeezed into the living room. Her back to him, her playing unguarded. No audience, no polish, just feeling. He didn't interrupt. He leaned against the doorway and listened. When she finished, she turned and jumped slightly. How long have you been there? Long enough, he said. That wasn't for anyone else, was it? She shook her head. No, that one's just mine. He crossed the room and kissed her temple. Thank you for trusting me with it. She rested her hands on his chest. Thank you for never asking me to be smaller. He smiled faintly. I wouldn't know how. On the anniversary of the bookstore incident, because of course Marsha remembered, she dragged him downtown under mysterious pretenses. When they stepped inside the familiar store, Max laughed quietly. You're serious. I tripped into your life here, she said solemnly. I feel like that deserves acknowledgement. They sat at a small table near the back, coffee cups between them. You know, Marsha said thoughtfully, I used to think you were too good for me. Max blinked. That's absurd. No, she said. You loved me without needing anything in return. That terrified me. He met her gaze. I love you now because you choose me back. Her eyes softened. Every day. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Marsha watched Max methodically set his alarm. You still get up at the same time, she observed. Yes. Same sound. Yes. She smiled. Some people would call that boring. He glanced at her. Do you? She shook her head, crawling into bed. I call it safe. And I spent a long time thinking I didn't deserve that. He turned off the light and joined her. You always did. She tucked herself against him, comfortable, unguarded. You know what I love most about us? She murmured. What? We didn't win, she said. We didn't beat the odds. We just chose differently. Max kissed the top of her head. Quietly. Intentionally. Every day, he agreed. As sleep claimed them, the city outside continued as it always had. Busy, indifferent, alive. Inside the apartment, nothing dramatic happened. Just two people who had learned that love didn't need to be loud to last. It only needed to stay.